Paranormal in Pennsylvania may discuss topics such as suicide, murder, and other potentially upsetting things. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to Paranormal in Pennsylvania,
where we discuss history and haunts.
Today's story takes us to a fort that was made out of necessity. I'm Sarah.
And I'm David.
Let's get into it. It's Fort Necessity. Ha ha ha.
Oh, that was a great dad joke. I'll give it to you.
Thank you. So I had honestly never heard of this fort, but we were with my family on a cabin weekend and we passed it. My family loves history, so we thought maybe we'll go there. And my dad was like, maybe it's haunted, because he says that about everywhere we pass. It'll be like a coffee shop that maybe looks a little gothic, and he'll be like, well, do you think that place is haunted? Because he wants to support the podcast.
Both.
Yeah.
There's some facetiousness.
Yeah. In this case, he was right. So let me start by saying that this museum, it's a park too, exceeded my expectations. It was kind of in the middle of nowhere, and we thought, okay, we'll stop and we'll take some content for Pip. We'll see if we feel anything. No, we ended up actually spending time in the museum and actually walking around the battlefield because the history was so cool.
Yeah, the history was really cool, and like you said, it really did blow our expectations, mainly because of how modern it was, up to date, and the dioramas and such were all very, very nicely put together.
Yeah, it was so cool. We spent about an hour and a half there, and you could easily spend longer. There was so much information that I just stopped reading it and ended up actually taking pictures of it.
Yeah, there's a lot of information to digest, but it's all like really interesting. Yeah. It's just like she said, a lot.
So, some history. Fort Necessity was George Washington's fort in the French and Indian War, and hence the name. It was built out of necessity. There was a clash between Britain, France, and the local indigenous people, and he had to build this fort in a clearing so that he could defend it. And the clearing is called the Great Meadows. It's surrounded by tree lines that the French used as cover, and the fort itself is actually it has a circular wall around it.
Yeah, but with pretty decent gaps. Like if you were to take cover behind the wall, you're pretty exposed still.
Yes. On July 3rd, 600 French and 100 indigenous people approached the fort. Many stayed hidden in the woods, and on the battlefield, they actually have markers of where the tree line was at various years, so you can understand better how the landscape has changed.
To put in perspective, though, the tree line for when this battle took place was fairly close, but apparently it was quite thick, like dense. Thank you. Much denser.
And the fight, because of this, lasted from the morning hours until 8 p.m., and the British ended up suffering more casualties than the French. The French commander called for a truce and a surrender. The surrender document was mistranslated for George Washington, and he didn't understand that he was agreeing that he assassinated the French leader Jumonville. That's the English pronunciation
of
Jumonville.
But correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't the whole battle begin because they thought this French officer was assassinated and this was the retaliation?
He was assassinated, but they didn't know who did it. They thought Washington did it, but he didn't do it. But in signing this treaty, he unknowingly took ownership of the assassination.
It was an admittance of guilt that, yes, I did plan and execute the assassination.
Yeah.
But in defense of his translator, by candlelight, I had to translate this document that was also then, it was raining, so got wet, the ink smeared.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of guns.
Yeah, there is a lot working against that poor translator too.
Yeah. So on July 4th, the British troops left the fort and marched back to Virginia, and the French burned the fort down. Later on, Washington actually bought the land because he hated that it was one of his defeats, and he was hoping to rent it out but was not able to. When he died, it eventually became a farm, but the farmer never plowed the land that the fort was on out of respect for Washington. In 1932, the Fort Necessity National Battlefield opened, but at this time, historians thought that the fort and surrounding walls were actually square. In 1952, so that's 20 years after it opened, an archaeologist completed a dig for the 200th anniversary of the fort, and he found that there was indeed proof that it was circular. So that completely changed everything for it. And today you can visit it as a national park. It's completely free. Check it out. It's so cool.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, isn't there also like a hiking trail that they have there as well?
Yeah, it's near the Ohio Pile State Park, I guess. And so a bunch of trails actually crisscross it. We saw some backpackers when we were at the fort, actually. But to get from the museum to the battlefield, it's what, half a mile, they said?
Yeah, but it's a totally paved
it's
route. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's a very easy walk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, ADA compliant, I'd say. So moving into the ghost stories, because clearly lots of people died or were injured here. Many of the hauntings described here are common to other battlefields. For example, Brandywine Battlefield, which we have also covered. As we always say, the spirits exist in their afterlife as they lived. And so because of that, they're reliving this war. The sound of musket shots can be heard when walking across the battlefield. Some people report when they're inside the fort that they can hear the whisper of commands given to troops. People say that the whispers are in English, French, and an unknown language, which has been suggested to be the local indigenous language of the time.
Interesting. It's also interesting that it's of whispers.
Mm-hmm.
My like during battle, you're not. I imagine you're not whispering. I think you're yelling orders because they're of the sound of gunfire, people shouting in pain.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if it's when, like, in between the battle, or like when it first started, or when they built the fort.
Sure, that might make more sense. But also, to be clear, this fort is very tiny.
Yes.
Like, it's the building that was in the center. To me, I wouldn't even call it a cabin. It was like 5 feet by maybe 6 feet, maybe?
Yeah, if you laid down, you could have touched all the walls.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very, very small. So that's on the battlefield, but there are other hauntings within the museum, actually. So in the visitor center, rangers report hearing footsteps when no one is there. And there are some demonstrations at the fort during the summer months, and people have reported seeing historical reenactors walking through the museum and battlefield, but they're only there on very few days, like around the anniversaries of the fight. So many people assume that these are the spirits of the 13 dead Frenchmen and 1 dead Englishman walking through the museum.
I mean, that could make sense.
Yeah, you would think it was just a reenactor.
Yeah, you wouldn't have a big reaction to seeing that.
Right, which is crazy. So here's the first-hand account of one such occurrence. Quote, "When we saw a soldier walking quietly through a field, we thought it was cool. We eventually went back to the visitors center before leaving. The employee asked us how our visit was. When we told her about the soldier in the field, she smiled and said there was no reenactors there that day. We were spooked. We described him and she confirmed that he's one of the resident ghosts." End quote.
Spooky.
Yeah, that's so crazy that even the people in the visitors center know these resident ghosts that walk around.
Yeah, and of course, like, I'd also get like a big cheese on and be like, yeah, let me tell you who that was.
Yeah, I wonder if they do know who it is.
Oh, yeah, I don't know if they know a specific name, but, I'd be grinning ear to ear that I'm telling somebody that they had a ghost encounter.
Yeah.
That'd be fun.
Well, that's us. So when there are reenactors there, the reenactors have actually reported the same thing, seeing spirits of soldiers. So one story goes that a group of reenactors saw a soldier who they thought was a reenactor and signaled to the person to come over. He didn't say anything, but he joined them, and they went on with reenacting it. But once they reached a certain point on the battlefield, he fell down and disappeared. So people think that's when he would have been shot.
That's cool too.
Yeah, and it was it was one of the French, so they were coming out of the woods, and we know that 13 Frenchmen died.
So I'm wondering if it's that has like a lot of implications potentially for interacting with other battlefields. If you dress up in the times of the battlefield, do you get more of a response? Can you get more of a response, or is And then what are the potentials of like that going very negative and backfiring at you?
I see what you mean. If the spirit doesn't realize that they're dead and they think that you're genuinely a member of the French army in the war.
Right.
What are you getting pulled into? That's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, it's a question that I definitely don't know the answer to.
Yeah, neither do I. In addition to British and French soldiers, visitors report hearing the signature scream of indigenous people. That's how it's described. I don't know. When they scalp someone. So I guess there was a common scream for that specific activity. I've never heard of this concept before. Scalping I have, but of a specific scream that corresponds, I've never heard of that.
Like a war cry, victory celebration kind of deal? Or
I guess. But apparently people are hearing it there regularly. But I think it's interesting because there's indigenous peoples on both sides. So I wonder what side they were on. Because you can survive being scalped. I mean, in Crow Rock, I think we had that. One of them survived being scalped. But the chances have to be slim of surviving that.
Why, like from dying of infection, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess.
That's a big part of your body to leave exposed in 1752.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
So I'm wondering if it's the indigenous person that died there. It didn't say that any indigenous people died. Or it's the person that died from the scalping reliving it. Or it's just echoes of what happens there.
Well, and an interesting statement you said, there's no reports of indigenous people dying. Genuine question, would the French have even reported those casualties?
I thought about that a lot. It's both sides so manipulated the local indigenous populations, I don't know if they would have kept track.
Yeah, so perhaps then there were indigenous people that lost their lives there.
Yeah, that's true. The YouTube channel Our Haunted Travels went here and they filmed the whole time. They captured a white swish. It's not really an orb per se in the image, but it's clearly something, and it's in the door to the actual like cabin part of the fort.
Oh, yeah, that center structure.
Yeah. And they also, throughout their time there, used a spirit box to try to talk to some of the spirits there. And they didn't get any responses. You see them walking through the trail, going around like the circular part, going into the little room, nothing until finally they say, it must be peaceful now. Or it's peaceful here now, but it probably wasn't when the spirits were alive. And then the word Providence comes through. And so they talk a lot about it, like, were you from Providence area? What, like, is that the name of the place? Is it something about this Providence? They never really identified what it is because they didn't. Actually, what ended up happening is the Rangers come and they stop using the spirit box. But they did say that while interacting with the spirit box, they felt the sensation of spider webs all over themselves, which could be spider webs because you are in this fort. But apparently the feeling is associated with a spirit passing by you of like phantom spider webs.
Oh, interesting.
I'd never heard that before, but that's what they were saying in the video.
I hadn't heard that either.
Yeah. So it could be that.
But I mean, it's not like we're the know-all,
Of course not,
and
yeah.
all be all of paranormal.
Right. They later talk to a park ranger, and while he tells the story of the battle, they keep the spirit box on in their pocket, and their spirit box records transcripts of anything that comes through. So they were able to keep it on and then actually look at it later after they left. And
That's fancy.
I know. They had a lot of nice equipment, it looked like. So specifically, the ranger was telling the story of a soldier named Rocket who had to get an amputation on site. And they hear the words Rocket, Tool, Poem as they leave the battlefield after hearing that story.
Rocket.
Rocket's his name. The soldier's name is Rocket.
Interesting.
So Rocket, Tool, and Poem. Poem doesn't fit. I think Tool could have been about an amputation tool. Poem doesn't really fit.
Like poem?
Yeah.
Unless he considered himself a poet.
Maybe. Or I was thinking maybe they were trying to say home and like the spirit box just recorded it wrong or something.
Sure. I mean, that could easily be the case as well. But when you say rocket, like ROCKET?
Apparently, yeah. Like a
Interesting.
space rocket. Yeah. I don't know.
I don't know either. I guess like I don't know the history of rocketry.
Yeah, I
but-
don't either. It could be like a rocket, like fireworks maybe?
Yeah, I guess fireworks had made their way over into Europe by this point, and
Yeah, in
Rocketry.
1752. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so no. I think rocket.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah, I think it makes sense.
makes sense.
So those were all of the hauntings. Would you go back?
Yeah, happily. I think that was a really cool place. I think that the areas that I tried to read, but like knowledge overload wasn't really reading as well. I think I would love to go back and reread those and learn some more. But also if like they ever hosted like a haunting event or anything, that'd be really cool too.
Yeah, I want to go back for sure. It's actually part of a big campus, or a big, not campus, but there's a ton of historical sites right around that area because of these battlefields. And there was a tavern there that is currently closed for the season. We were there the first weekend in November, and it closed at the end of October. So we didn't get to see that, but they did tell us that the tavern is haunted. And also our Haunted Travels, the YouTube channel, went to the tavern as well and had a lot of hauntings there. So I would love to go back to the tavern.
Yeah. Doesn't it also serve food? Because we can also eat there.
It does.
Yeah, so get some food too.
Yeah, it was really cool. I highly recommend check out Fort Necessity. I had never heard of it, but it was really cool to learn more about, the smaller parts of American history and learn about these hauntings, which are pretty significant. So tune in next Thursday to see what haunted spaces we talk about next. Stay spooky.